The day my 3 children sat me down to tell me they'd found the perfect nursing home, I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I just listened and quietly started packing. My name is Margaret Hill. I'm 72 years old. My 3 adult children, Michael, Karen, and Emily, showed up in my kitchen that morning, their faces composed, their mission clearly rehearsed. Michael, 52, business suit sharp. Karen, 49, flawless and efficient. Emily, 46, chipper but distant. They said, "Mom, we've arranged for you to move. You'll be better off there, with people your age." They smiled, saying, "You'll thank us later, Mom." But the way they avoided my eyes told me everything. Have you ever been made to feel like a burden by your own family? Tell me in the comments. Before we dive deeper, let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. I remember when life was measured not by money or comfort, but by the number of lunches I could pack before sunrise. After my husband passed away, the house fell silent, except for the sound of homework papers rustling under my tired hands. I was a school teacher by day, a mother by every hour that followed. There were nights I graded essays under the flickering kitchen light, while a pot of soup simmered on the stove, thin soup stretched to feed 3 growing mouths. I skipped more meals than I care to admit, convincing myself I wasn't hungry, when the truth was, I simply wanted my children to have enough. The rings and necklaces my husband had given me when times were better slowly disappeared one by one, sold quietly to cover tuition, rent, and braces. I used to whisper apologies to his photograph, promising him that every sacrifice would be worth it if our children had a chance at the future we once dreamed of. I never remarried. There were men who asked, kind souls who offered companionship, but I always said no. I told myself they were enough. Michael with his endless curiosity, Karen with her fierce determination, Emily with her gentle laugh that could chase away any storm. Every choice I made revolved around them. When other teachers spent their summers traveling or resting, I worked extra shifts at the library and tutored children in the neighborhood. Every extra dollar went into envelopes, marked with their names, college funds written in my shaky handwriting. I remember standing at their graduation ceremonies, clutching flowers I could barely afford, my heart swelling as each of them walked across that stage. In those moments, I felt rich. Not in the way people measure wealth, but in love and pride and the certainty that my struggles had built something lasting. The walls of our home were covered in photographs and report cards, framed memories of laughter and small victories. Each smile in those pictures was my reward for the long nights and quiet tears. I thought raising them alone was my hardest battle. I believed that once they grew up and succeeded, my heart would finally rest, knowing I had done enough. But sitting in that nursing home brochure meeting years later, I realized I had taught them everything except how not to forget the person who gave them everything. And to everyone listening, remember this: love without gratitude can turn even the brightest home into a stranger's house. If you've ever given your all and felt unseen, this story will remind you why some lessons come late, but never too late. It's strange how distance doesn't always begin with miles. Sometimes it begins with silence, soft, creeping, and unnoticeable at first. I remember the years right after the kids had all moved out. The house still smelled of their childhood, Michael's cologne, Karen's floral perfume, Emily's vanilla candles. But slowly, those scents faded, just like their voices on the other end of the line. Michael was the first to drift away. My firstborn, the boy who once built me a birdhouse for Mother's Day, now a CEO who schedules his own mother like a meeting. His assistant once called to check my availability for a 15-minute video call. 15 minutes. My son, whose hand I held through fevers and heartbreaks, could only spare 15 minutes for me. He always said he was too busy, running meetings, managing investors, flying between cities. Holidays became another business transaction. A quick gift card emailed on Christmas morning, a polite text on my birthday. I told myself he meant well. I wanted to believe that. Karen. Oh, my beautiful Karen. She always cared about appearances. Even as a little girl, she'd fix her hair before leaving for school. After her divorce, she built a perfect world on social media, smiling selfies, motivational quotes, expensive brunches. To her thousands of followers, she was thriving. But to me, she was distant. When I called, She'd answer in that distracted tone, "Mom, I'll call you back. I'm just about to post something." The callbacks rarely came. She said visits made her sad, that the old house was too depressing. I started noticing how she'd post about family dinners with friends, but never with me. It's funny how a phone can connect the world, yet somehow it disconnected us. And then there's Emily, my youngest, the one who lives just 20 minutes away. She used to drop by every week after work, bringing me coffee and leftover muffins. But as the years passed, her visits grew shorter, her excuses longer. "I'm just so tired, Mom. Maybe next weekend. Work's been crazy." I'd tell her it was fine, but after she hung up, I'd stare at the empty mug she left behind, still holding her lipstick stain like a memory refusing to fade. The house feels different now. The laughter that once echoed down the hallway has been replaced by the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking clock that sounds louder every night. 3 chairs sit around the dining table, untouched and waiting. Sometimes I set the table for all of us out of habit: plates, glasses, forks, as if somehow doing that will summon them home. It never does. Last Christmas, I made a small roast, just enough for one. I sat by the window, watching families drive by, their cars packed with gifts and laughter. My phone stayed silent, except for a single group message that read, "Merry Christmas, Mom. Hope you're having a great day." I smiled at the screen, whispered, "I am," and set the phone down beside an untouched second plate. Loneliness doesn't arrive all at once. It seeps in quietly, in the pauses between calls, in the holidays spent waiting, in the fading sound of footsteps that once filled your home. And as I sat there that night, with the twinkling lights reflecting off the empty chairs, I realized love can fade without hatred, and distance can grow without goodbyes. 6 months before that morning, my children told me they'd found the perfect nursing home. I lost my oldest friend, Mrs. Adelaide Turner. Adelaide and I had known each other for more than 40 years. We met when I was still teaching 3rd grade, and she was the quiet librarian who never married, never had children, but always carried a certain calmness in her eyes. She'd walk to school every morning with a scarf tied around her hair and a paperback novel tucked under her arm. Over the decades, we grew inseparable, 2 widows who understood each other's silences. After my husband died, it was Adelaide who showed up every Sunday with homemade soup and the gentle reminder that life still had warmth left in it. When she passed away, I didn't expect anything beyond her friendship's memory. Her funeral was small, no family, just a few neighbors, and me. I remember standing by her casket, thinking how quiet her life had been, how unseen. But 2 weeks later, I received a call from her attorney. I sat in his office, hands folded in my lap, as he slid a thick envelope across the desk and said words that almost made me faint. Adelaide had left everything to me: her savings, her home, and something far greater than I could comprehend. She had quietly built a fortune through real estate and wise investments. Her will listed $3.5 million in assets and shares in a growing chain of privately owned nursing homes spread across several states. I stared at the papers, trying to breathe, realizing that my gentle, unassuming friend had been a silent investor in an empire built on caring for the elderly. The irony didn't escape me, the very kind of place my own children would one day decide to send me. I remember leaving the attorney's office with the envelope pressed against my chest. The world looked the same, but I didn't. I could still hear Adelaide's voice in my head, her favorite saying, "The way people treat you when they think you have nothing tells you everything." For weeks, I sat with that thought, staring at the check, the stock certificates, the letter she'd left for me, handwritten, neat, full of love. "Use this however your heart leads you, Margaret," she wrote. "But promise me one thing, never let money decide who deserves your kindness." I could have told my children then. I could have watched their faces light up, seen their schedules suddenly open, heard their calls multiply overnight. But something inside me hesitated. I wanted to know what love looked like without a price tag. So, I told no one. Not a word. I kept living the same way, wearing the same clothes, driving the same aging car. I still clipped coupons, still turned off lights to save on the electric bill, still thanked Michael for sending grocery money even when I didn't need it anymore. I wanted to see them for who they truly were, not who they became when money entered the picture. Each time they visited, I watched them carefully, listened to their words, their tone, the way they hurried through conversations. I waited for some glimmer of the children I once knew, the ones who hugged me without checking their watches. But the calls stayed short, the visits shorter. The love, conditional. I realized Adelaide had given me more than an inheritance. She'd given me a choice, a mirror reflecting the truth about my family. So when the day came that my children sat me down to tell me they'd chosen a nursing home for me, I didn't fight. I didn't need to. They thought they were taking control of my life. What they didn't know was that, long before their decision, I had already packed something far more valuable than clothes, a plan. It happened on a Sunday morning, one of those quiet, golden hours when sunlight filters through the curtains just right, and the world feels gentle. I was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping my coffee, when I heard the sound of 3 car doors shutting almost in unison. That kind of coordination doesn't happen by accident. My children never arrived together unless there was a plan. And that morning, they had one. Michael walked in first, his voice firm and rehearsed. Karen followed, her perfume preceding her, her eyes scanning the room like she was already preparing for an emotional cleanup. Emily came last, hesitant but clearly coached, her smile trembling under the weight of something practiced. I could tell from their faces that this wasn't a visit, it was an intervention. They had gathered like a boardroom meeting with one agenda: me. Michael cleared his throat, set his briefcase on the counter, and began, "Mom, we've been talking, and we think it's time you started living somewhere more suitable." Karen chimed in before I could speak, her tone wrapped in feigned tenderness. "You'll have friends your age, Mom. Activities, games, people to talk to. It'll be good for you," Emily added softly. "You shouldn't live alone anymore. The house is too big. It's just not safe." They all avoided looking directly at me, as if afraid my eyes might remind them of something: guilt, maybe, or love they no longer wanted to confront. I sat there quietly, watching the way Michael's fingers drummed on the table, how Karen kept smoothing her skirt, how Emily twisted her ring nervously. I let them talk. Then, Michael handed me a glossy brochure. "Sunrise Haven Retirement Home," it read. The pictures were bright, smiling seniors playing chess, a woman laughing over a cup of tea, manicured gardens bathed in sunshine. It looked like paradise. But I had worked long enough with words and pictures to know how easily they can lie. Michael continued, his tone shifting to businesslike authority. "We've already put down the deposit. They're expecting you this weekend." He said it as if he were announcing a quarterly report, final and decided. My name wasn't even part of the decision anymore. I was just the subject of it. I asked quietly, "And what happens to the house?" Karen spoke quickly, too quickly. "We'll take care of everything. You won't have to worry about a single thing." Emily nodded, eyes cast down. "It's for your own good, Mom. For my own good." How easily those words roll off the tongue when people want to ease their conscience. They said it like they were saving me, not discarding me. I wanted to remind them that this was the house where their father and I built our lives. The house where every inch told a story, birthday balloons once taped to the walls, height marks penciled into the doorway, echoes of laughter still clinging to the corners. But I didn't. Instead, I smiled faintly and asked, "Sunrise Haven, you said?" Karen nodded, hopeful. "Yes, Mom. It's one of the best in the state. You'll thank us later." Her voice cracked just slightly, as if she wasn't entirely sure. I looked at each of them, memorizing their faces in that moment, the mixture of pity and practicality, affection and avoidance. And then I said softly, "All right, if that's what you think is best." Their shoulders relaxed, relief washing over them. They mistook my calm for agreement. But deep down, as they talked logistics, packing, movers, paperwork, I was thinking of Adelaide. I was thinking of her shares, of the signature on that letter, of the quiet empire she had built and entrusted to me. Sunrise Haven, the name sounded familiar. And for good reason. Adelaide Turner had owned shares in that very chain, the same one they had chosen for me. As my children stood around my kitchen, congratulating themselves for doing the right thing, I felt a stillness settle over me, not of defeat, but of certainty. I let them make their plans, speak their well-intentioned words, and I nodded at all the right moments. But inside, I already knew what they didn't. They thought they were sending me away, What they didn't know was that I already owned the place they were sending me to. The morning I was meant to leave, the air felt heavier than usual, like even the walls knew what was about to happen. The movers were already outside, their truck idling at the curb. Inside, boxes lined the hallway like silent witnesses, neatly labeled by hands that didn't belong to me. My children had insisted on packing most of my things to make it easier. They thought they were doing me a favor. They didn't know that with every folded blanket, every taped box, they were sealing away decades of my life. I walked slowly through the house, my footsteps echoing in a way they hadn't before. The living room where birthdays, graduations, and Christmas mornings had once spilled over with laughter now stood stripped bare. The walls looked too clean, as though they'd been wiped of memory. I stopped by the old piano in the corner, the one Michael used to pound with his little fists pretending he could play. The keys had gathered dust, but when I pressed one softly, it still answered me with that same worn-out note. It was the sound of something ending. In the kitchen, the scent of coffee lingered faintly, my morning ritual for 40 years. That corner table where I used to grade papers, the same spot where I wrote countless lunch notes and grocery lists, felt strangely foreign now. It used to be my command post as a mother, a teacher, a wife. Now it was just an empty surface, waiting for someone else's life to unfold upon it. I moved toward the doorway, my fingers tracing the wooden frame. There, faint but still visible, were the pencil marks I could never bring myself to paint over, each one marking the growth of my children. Michael at 6, Karen at 8, Emily at 4. Their names scribbled beside the lines in childish handwriting. I could still see the excitement in their faces the day I let them hold the pencil themselves. Standing there, I whispered, almost to the air, "This house heard every laugh, every tear, and now it'll hear none of mine." My throat tightened as I turned toward the staircase. Each step creaked the way it always had, complaining softly, faithfully. At the top, I paused at the doorway of my bedroom. The bed was neatly made, the curtains drawn back just enough to let the light in. On the dresser sat a framed photograph of my late husband, James, smiling the same gentle smile he always had. I touched the edge of the frame and whispered, "They think they're doing the right thing, love. But you'd know better, wouldn't you?" For a moment, I thought I felt him there, not as a ghost, but as a memory too stubborn to leave. I smiled faintly and picked up the photograph, slipping it into my bag. It was the only thing I couldn't leave behind. Downstairs, I could hear Karen urging the movers to hurry. Michael was on his phone, confirming something with the nursing home. Emily stood by the window, pretending not to cry. I took one last look around the faded wallpaper, the chipped vase, the quiet warmth that only a home full of history could hold. Then I closed my eyes and let the silence settle. They thought I was saying goodbye to this house, but I wasn't. My name was still on the deed, the documents still sealed in a safe deposit box only I could access. This home wasn't just wood and paint, it was years of my sacrifice, my laughter, my love. And though they were driving me away, I knew something they didn't. I wasn't leaving my home behind. Not completely. The first night at Sunrise Haven was colder than I expected. Not the kind of cold that comes from temperature, but the kind that seeps into your chest when everything familiar has been stripped away. The room they gave me was spotless. 2 spotless beige walls, a neatly folded blanket at the edge of the bed, a vase of fake flowers on the windowsill. It didn't smell like home. It smelled of disinfectant and something faintly metallic, a mixture of bleach, medicine, and resignation. The kind of smell that clings to loneliness. Every sound felt exaggerated, the distant squeak of rubber soles against polished floors, the hum of fluorescent lights that never quite stopped buzzing, and the occasional soft moan from someone down the hall calling a name that no longer answered. I unpacked slowly that first evening. One careful movement at a time, my clothes looked out of place in the sterile closet, soft fabrics against hard walls. When I finally sat on the bed, the mattress sighed beneath me like it too understood that no one really wanted to be here. The caregivers were polite, their smiles trained, their voices clipped with efficiency. "Dinner is at 6, Mrs. Hill," one said, already halfway out the door before I could respond. "Medication at 8. Lights out by 10. Their kindness was mechanical gestures performed out of duty, not heart. I wasn't angry at them, they were doing their jobs. But it was strange to realize that being cared for could feel so much like being managed. Days passed in quiet sameness. Meals were served on schedule, pills handed out like clockwork, and everyone moved through routines that never changed. I watched other residents shuffle through the hallways, some lost in their own worlds, others pretending not to be. Most of them kept their heads down, eyes dull, conversations sparse. It was a place filled with people who had been left waiting for visits, for calls, for a familiar face that might never return. Then, one afternoon, while I was sitting by the window pretending to read, a voice interrupted my thoughts. "You're new," it said. I looked up to see a woman in a wheelchair, her silver hair pulled back in a bun, her eyes still sharp despite her years. "Name's Rose," she said, extending a hand with fingers so thin they trembled slightly. From that moment, something in the air shifted. Rose had been at Sunrise Haven for 5 years. She told me so with a kind of weary pride, as if surviving that long was an achievement. She had a dry sense of humor and a sharp tongue, the kind that made you laugh when you least expected it. But beneath her wit, I could sense a heaviness. One evening, as we sat watching the sunset through the glass doors, she admitted softly, "My son used to visit every Sunday. He promised he'd never miss a week." She paused, eyes fixed on the fading light. That was 5 years ago. That night, I couldn't sleep. Her words kept echoing in my mind, 5 years of waiting. I began noticing the small things about her afterward. The way she fixed her hair every morning as if expecting someone, the way she lingered by the front door during visiting hours, pretending to just enjoy the sunlight. Each time the elevator chimed, she looked up, just for a moment, before returning to her book, her face unreadable. Rose and I became inseparable. We ate together, read together, and whispered about everything the others were too tired to care about: old loves, lost dreams, and the families who moved on without us. She made the place bearable. In a world that felt structured and lifeless, she brought warmth. I started to laugh again, real laughter, the kind that filled the space between us. And sometimes, when we were both quiet, I caught her looking at me with a faint smile, as if saying thank you without words. For the first time since I'd arrived, Sunrise Haven didn't feel like a cage. It felt like a waiting room, not for death, but for understanding. Through Rose, I realized that loneliness could be shared, and in sharing it, somehow softened. I still missed my home, my life, my freedom, but I began to feel something I hadn't in a long time. Purpose, because Rose had stopped hoping, and I wasn't ready to let her live the rest of her days waiting for a son who had already forgotten her. It didn't take long before I started noticing things, small things at first, the kind of details most people would overlook. Meals shrinking in portion size, residents whispering about canceled outings, a nurse mentioning her paycheck being late. At first, I told myself it was nothing, that maybe I was imagining it. But the more I watched, the clearer it became. Sunrise Haven was falling apart from the inside. You can learn a lot when you keep quiet and listen. One morning, while helping Rose back to her room, I overheard 2 staff members arguing in the hallway. "They're cutting hours again," one said. "If this place gets sold, I'm out." My heart tightened. Sold? To whom? And what would happen to the people who called this place home? That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, thinking about Adelaide Turner, my dear friend, the woman who'd taught me that real power isn't in noise, but in knowledge. Adelaide had built her fortune quietly, owning several nursing facilities across the state. She always said, "People underestimate the elderly because they confuse silence with weakness." I smiled faintly, remembering her voice. She'd left me her estate for a reason. Maybe this was it. Maybe this was the moment she'd been preparing me for. The next morning, I asked one of the staff for an envelope. I told her I wanted to write to my cousin, but what I really did was write to my lawyer, Richard Hayes, Adelaide's old attorney, a man who'd known me for years. My handwriting was slow but steady. Need to speak confidentially. Urgent. Use Adelaide's contacts. I sealed it carefully, handed it to a volunteer heading to town, and waited. For days, I carried on like nothing had changed. I smiled during meals, read books with Rose, and played my part, the quiet widow adjusting to her new life. But inside, I was setting the wheels in motion. A week later, I received a letter. It was plain, unmarked, slipped under my door like a secret. Inside, just one line in Richard's careful handwriting. Meet at the garden bench, Thursday, 2 p.m. My pulse quickened. That Thursday, I walked slowly to the garden, pretending to feed the birds. Richard was already there, dressed casually to avoid suspicion. He greeted me with a soft nod. "I got your message, Margaret," he said, lowering his voice. "I've looked into it. Sunrise Haven is drowning in debt. The owners plan to sell within 6 months." He paused. "Unless someone steps in first." I felt something spark inside me, not anger, but purpose. "Can I buy it?" I asked. Richard hesitated, studying my face. "You could," he said finally. "You have the assets, thanks to Mrs. Turner's shares. It wouldn't even scratch your principal." My hands trembled slightly as I reached for the pen he handed me. "Then let's do it," I said quietly. But no one must know. Over the next few weeks, Richard handled everything. I became the silent buyer through a private trust, the Hill Foundation, we called it. Every night, after dinner, I'd retreat to my room and go over the documents he sent me: ledgers, contracts, property reports. I learned the language of ownership in secret, one page at a time. The staff thought I was just another old woman reading romance novels. They didn't know I was reviewing financial statements and making calls through a disposable phone Richard had arranged. The day the sale went through, I was sitting by Rose's bed, listening to her hum softly to herself. My phone buzzed once, a simple message from Richard. "It's done. You're the new owner of Sunrise Haven." I didn't smile. I just sat there, letting the weight of it sink in. I looked around the room, the peeling paint, the worn floors, the tired faces of residents who had long stopped expecting anything better. And for the first time in a long while, I felt alive. I began making quiet changes. First, I arranged for new bedding and fresh paint under the guise of a charitable donation. Then came better meals, fresh produce, homemade soup, and desserts that reminded the residents of home. The atmosphere started to shift. People began to smile again. Even the staff walked with a lighter step, not knowing that the woman eating oatmeal beside them at breakfast was signing their paychecks behind closed doors. Everyone thought I was another lonely widow, tucked away and forgotten. But I wasn't just another name on a door. I was the silent owner of their future, and none of them had the faintest idea. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and roses, the same mix that lingered in every corner of Sunrise Haven. I was sitting in the recreation room with Rose, flipping through a stack of old magazines someone had left on the table. She was dozing off beside me, her hands folded neatly in her lap. A young nurse named Jasmine sat across the room, scrolling on her phone, smiling to herself. Then I heard her gasp softly. "Oh my gosh," she whispered, covering her mouth. "That's such a pretty house." I didn't think much of it until she turned her screen toward the other nurse beside her. "Look," her caption says, "New beginnings." Something inside me stirred an instinct. I leaned slightly closer, pretending to adjust the blanket on my lap. The picture on her phone was bright and familiar: my house. My white brick home with the blue shutters and the rose garden I'd tended for over 30 years. It was unmistakable. The oak tree in the corner, the porch swing my late husband built, all of it staring back at me from that glowing screen. My breath caught. "Excuse me, dear," I said softly, forcing a small smile. "May I see that post again? I think I recognize that house." Jasmine smiled politely, turning the phone so I could see. "Oh, sure. It's from someone named Karen Miller. She posted it an hour ago. Says, 'Sold, new beginnings for us.' Looks like her mom's old place. Beautiful, isn't it?" Her words landed like stones in my chest. Karen Miller, my daughter, my own blood, beaming beside a sold sign in the driveway of the home I built from nothing. I could almost hear her voice in that caption, cheerful, proud, and utterly unaware of what she had just done. I stared at the photo for a long moment before handing the phone back. "Yes," I said softly, "it's beautiful." Then I turned toward the window and watched the clouds drift past, keeping my face still while my heart sank into silence. Later that evening, I learned the details from Richard. "They sold the property last week," he told me over the phone, his voice measured. $740,000, cash buyer. The funds were split evenly among your children." He paused. They didn't waste any time. No, they hadn't. Within days, the updates began flooding social media. Karen opening a small boutique downtown, posing beside racks of imported dresses. Michael grinning beside his brand new Tesla, captioned, "Hard work pays off." And Emily, sweet, quiet Emily, posting sun-drenched photos from Greece, cocktails in hand, hashtags about healing and letting go. I looked at each post through the screen of the phone Richard had given me for business matters. My fingers didn't tremble. My pulse didn't rise. I simply watched carefully, quietly, as the people who had sold my memories paraded my life as their fresh start. That night, Rose noticed I was quieter than usual. "Something on your mind, dear?" she asked gently. I smiled, tucking the blanket around her shoulders. "Just thinking about family," I said, "and how easily some people forget where home truly is." When she drifted back to sleep, I sat there in the dim light, my thoughts steady as stone. The irony made me smile, a small, cold smile. "New beginnings," Karen had written. How fitting. She had no idea just how new things were about to get. The morning light filtered through the thin curtains of my small nursing home room, and for the first time in months, I felt something other than numbness resolve. The kind that hums quietly in your bones, patient but unyielding. I had spent weeks gathering papers, signing documents, making calls through Adelaide's old lawyer, and finally, it was done. The ownership papers were in my name. I, Margaret Miller, once a public school teacher and widow, was now the full owner of Sunrise Haven, the place my children had so proudly tucked me away into. But Sunrise Haven would no longer be a place of quiet despair. No, I had a promise to keep to Adelaide, to Rose, and to every forgotten soul sitting in these dimly lit hallways waiting for a knock that never came. The first change came quietly. New uniforms for the caregivers, soft blue instead of sterile white. Warm meals prepared with fresh herbs instead of frozen trays, reheated in silence. The scent of lavender and baked bread began to replace the cold tang of bleach. Then came the gardens. Oh, the gardens. I hired a small crew to tear down the rusted benches and revive the flower beds that had long been choked with weeds. Roses, lilies, and daisies bloomed once more under the spring sun, their colors spilling across the courtyard like spilled paint. Rose, dear old Rose, wept when she saw it. "It smells like life again," she whispered, her trembling hands brushing the petals. And she was right. I raised the staff wages, too quietly, without grand announcements. The tired nurses who once moved like machines began to smile more, linger longer beside beds, and actually talk to the residents instead of rushing through the checklist. I could see it in their eyes, that long-lost glimmer of purpose. The walls were painted, the lights softened, and a piano was moved into the lounge. Every Friday evening, we gathered there, gray heads swaying, hands clapping, the room filled with laughter that echoed off walls that had once only known silence. Birthdays were celebrated again. We baked cakes, danced carefully in our wheelchairs, and told stories of the lives we once lived. Teachers, farmers, soldiers, nurses, mothers, fathers, people. Not burdens. Soon, the residents began to refer to the place differently. "This isn't a nursing home anymore," Rose said one afternoon as we watched children from the local school plant flowers in the courtyard. It's like living again." I smiled at her words, because she was unknowingly right. A month later, the old sign that read, "Sunrise Haven Retirement Home," was taken down. In its place stood a new one, gleaming softly under the morning sun. It read, "Adelaide Living Community. No one gets left behind here." I chose those words carefully, not just as a motto, but as a vow, a promise that no one would ever be discarded or forgotten again. Every corner of that place now breathed with purpose. You could hear it in the laughter at breakfast, see it in the bright flower pots by every window, feel it in the warmth that filled the hallways at night when the staff sang softly to residents who couldn't sleep. Sometimes, I'd stand by the garden gate in the evening, the wind carrying the sound of music and chatter from inside, and I'd think of Adelaide. I'd whisper into the breeze, "We did it, my friend. We gave them their lives back." And for the first time in a long, long while, I felt peace, not the lonely, silent kind that comes from surrender, but the kind that blooms from purpose. This place, this home, was no longer my exile. It was my redemption. It was a quiet Thursday morning when the front doors of Adelaide Living swung open, and I saw them, my 3 children, standing side by side for the first time in almost a year. Their faces were tired, drawn, and stripped of the self-assured confidence they once wore like armor. Michael's expensive watch was gone, his shirt sleeves rolled up, and for the first time, I saw worry etched across his features. Karen, once immaculately put together, had dark circles beneath her eyes. Her designer handbag looked almost out of place against the trembling of her manicured fingers. Emily, my youngest, clutched a crumpled tissue, her wedding ring conspicuously missing. They stood there, uncertain, like children again, lost and afraid. For a moment, I simply watched them. The same children who had smiled tightly as they helped me into a car and drove me away from my home. The same children who said, "You'll thank us later, Mom." But now they were the ones who looked as though they'd been displaced, stripped of something familiar. Can we talk?" Michael asked, his voice quieter than I remembered. He used to speak like a man used to being listened to. Now, every word sounded like an apology wrapped in hesitation. I took a slow step forward, my cane tapping softly against the polished floor. The sunlight poured through the large glass windows, illuminating the place that had once been gray and lifeless. Now, it glowed. Fresh flowers sat in vases along the hallway. Laughter drifted from the activity room, where a small group of residents played cards. The smell of warm bread filled the air. Karen's eyes darted around in disbelief. "Is this the same place?" she whispered, her voice cracking. Emily's gaze lingered on the residents sitting by the new fountain outside, chatting with visiting children from the local school. "It doesn't even look like a nursing home," she murmured. I smiled gently and nodded. "That's because it isn't," I said. "Welcome to Adelaide Living." Their confusion deepened. Michael frowned slightly, still trying to process what he was seeing. "Mom, what happened here?" I let the question hang in the air, watching as they took in every corner of the transformed facility. The murals, painted by volunteers, the soft music playing from the speakers, the warmth in every face that passed. "You could say," I began softly, "that I decided to make myself at home." Karen blinked rapidly, her lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. I saw tears threaten to spill, and for a fleeting moment, I saw the little girl who once came running to me after scraping her knee, desperate for comfort. Emily finally found her voice. "We didn't know things would fall apart," she whispered. "Michael's company shut down. Karen lost everything in that fire, and," she swallowed hard, "Tom left me." There was a long silence. Only the faint hum of life in the building filled the air. I looked at them, my grown children, broken and humbled by the same life that had once seemed to reward them for their distance. And then, gently, I said the words that made all 3 of them look up. "How can I help you?" Their eyes widened, not at the question itself, but at the way I said it, calm, assured, almost formal. It wasn't the voice of the mother they once guided into a car to be taken care of. It was the voice of a woman who had found her strength after being discarded. For a long while, no one spoke. Michael's eyes filled, his mouth tightening as he looked around once more. "You did all this?" he asked. "Yes," I replied simply, "with a little help from an old friend." Karen glanced toward the gold lettering above the lobby entrance, Adelaide Living Community. Her lips trembled. "Adelaide. You named it after her." "I did," I said softly. "She believed in me when I thought my best years were gone." They stood there, their pride quietly unraveling, replaced by something else, regret, real, heavy regret. And in that moment, I felt no anger, no desire to shame or punish, just a deep, quiet satisfaction. They had come expecting to find the same dim, forgotten place where they'd left me. Instead, they found light, laughter, and the mother they had underestimated reborn. "Would you like some tea?" I asked finally, gesturing toward the sunny lounge where residents chatted happily. "We just baked lemon bread." As they followed me in silence, I could almost hear their thoughts, every choice, every word they wished they could take back. And though I didn't say it aloud, a single thought echoed in my heart. Sometimes the tables don't just turn, they flip entirely. Karen was the first to speak, her voice trembling as her eyes darted from the polished floors to the bright paintings lining the hallways. "Mom, you live here?" she asked softly, as if saying it too loudly would shatter the fragile reality forming before her. I met her gaze calmly, hands clasped in front of me. "No," I said after a moment, allowing the silence to stretch between us. "I own here." The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Michael blinked as if he hadn't heard right. Emily took a step closer, confusion and disbelief etched across her face. What do you mean you own here?" she whispered. "I mean exactly what I said," I replied. "This entire community, the staff, the grounds, the programs, it's all under my care now." The shock was visible in every twitch of their faces. Michael rubbed the back of his neck, his mind no doubt calculating, processing, struggling to align this new truth with the fragile image he'd built of his elderly mother. Karen's lips parted, her expression a mixture of guilt and awe. Emily simply stood there, eyes glistening with tears that threatened to spill. Michael finally found his voice. "Why didn't you tell us?" I looked at him, my son once confident, now humbled by life's rough hand. "Because," I said slowly, "you never asked how I was, only what I had." Silence. It cut through the air like a blade, sharper than any accusation. Karen looked away first, her eyes tracing the marble floor as if searching for something to anchor herself. Emily's shoulders sank. Michael just stared at me, his mouth opening and closing, but no words came. I let the quiet linger not out of cruelty, but necessity. Sometimes silence teaches more than speeches ever could. Then I exhaled softly. "I'm not here to scold you," I said. "I'm here to offer something better, a second chance." Their eyes lifted in unison, uncertain but hopeful. "Michael," I continued, "you've always been good with numbers and people. I could use someone like you to manage operations here, to make sure this place keeps running smoothly." He blinked, caught off guard. "You want me to work here?" "Yes," I nodded. "Work. Not for me, but with me." Karen shifted nervously, her voice barely above a whisper. "And me?" "You've always had an eye for presentation and connection. You can help with our events, birthdays, fundraisers, volunteer drives. The residents would love your creative touch. They don't care about perfection, Karen. They care about presence." She swallowed hard, nodding, eyes glistening. I turned to Emily last. "And you," I said gently. "You've always had a soft heart, even when you tried to hide it behind exhaustion and excuses. I want you to lead our senior outreach, bring in local students, churches, and volunteers. Make sure no one here feels forgotten again." Emily's hand rose to her mouth, her chin trembling. "Mom, after everything you'd still trust us?" I smiled faintly. "It's not about trust, sweetheart. It's about choice. You three spent years chasing success while I sat quietly in a house filled with memories you'd forgotten. Now, life has brought you back here not to apologize, but to rebuild." I stepped closer, my voice steady but warm. "I don't want your apologies. I want your help. Help people like me, the ones who gave everything and were left with silence." Tears fell freely then. Karen sobbed openly. Michael looked away to hide his emotion, and Emily reached for my hand like a child again. And in that moment, standing in the middle of the place that had once been my exile, I felt something shift, not just in them, but in all of us. For the first time in years, there was no pretense, no distance, no pride, just a family learning what love really meant without a price tag. It didn't happen overnight. Healing never does. It comes in quiet steps, not grand gestures. The days that followed were slow, careful, and at times painfully awkward. The three of them, my children who once moved through life with such certainty, now found themselves learning how to begin again, just as I had. Emily was the first to accept. She showed up the very next morning, wearing simple jeans and a loose sweater, her hair tied back. She looked uncertain as she stepped into the activities room, clutching a clipboard I had left for her. But by the afternoon, something in her changed. I watched from the doorway as she sat beside Mr. Henderson, a retired postal worker who'd lost his wife 2 years ago. He was teaching her how to fold paper cranes, his old hands trembling as hers followed his lead. For the first time in years, I saw genuine light in her eyes. By the end of the week, She was laughing with residents, helping them write letters, organizing small concerts, even leading a morning meditation group. She once said she was too tired for people. Now, she told me she'd never felt so awake. Karen took longer. At first, she came only on weekends, nervous, hesitant, still clinging to the fragments of her old life. The boutique was gone, her social circle scattered, and the woman who once spent hours perfecting window displays now stood in front of a group of seniors trying to plan a friendship tea. Her first attempt was chaotic. The tables were uneven, the decorations mismatched, and she spilled tea on one of the residents. But instead of laughing at her, they applauded her effort. Mrs. Thompson, one of our most outspoken residents, patted Karen's hand and said, "Darling, the tea is fine. We just wanted you here." That simple moment softened something in her. She stopped trying to impress and started trying to connect. Within months, her events became the highlight of the community. Simple, heartfelt gatherings filled with laughter, music, and homemade cookies. Michael, however, resisted the longest. He accepted the operations role out of obligation, not faith. He treated it like a job, not a calling, counting numbers, checking budgets, making sure every process was efficient. But Adelaide Living wasn't built on efficiency, it thrived on empathy. And slowly, that truth began to reach him. It started one afternoon when he found Rose, the same 83-year-old who once told me the place smelled like life again, struggling to fix her radio. He knelt down, adjusted the dial, and waited as the static cleared to reveal a soft jazz tune. She looked at him, smiled, and said, "You've got kind eyes, young man. You remind me of my son." For the first time, Michael didn't rush off. He sat with her for an hour, just listening. After that, he began spending his lunch breaks in the common room instead of the office. He started learning names, remembering birthdays, and when one of the residents passed away, he was the first to attend the small memorial, standing silently beside me. I think that's when it finally clicked. This wasn't just my mission anymore, it was his, too. Months passed, and something extraordinary happened. We began to feel like a family again, not through guilt or obligation, but through shared purpose. Each of us had found a reason to be there, a way to give instead of take. And then came that evening I'll never forget. We held our first family dinner in the garden, under strings of warm lights that swayed in the summer breeze. The residents joined us, their laughter mixing with the scent of roasted chicken and blooming roses. Emily sat beside Mr. Henderson, helping him pour lemonade. Karen was busy making sure everyone had enough dessert. Michael grilled the corn, joking with the staff. And me? I sat in the middle of it all, surrounded by laughter, by music, by life. As I looked around, I realized that this moment was what I had been waiting for all along. Not revenge, not pride, but restoration. My children had come back to me, not as the people they once were, but as the people they were meant to be. The same home they had once placed me in to fade away had now become the place where we truly began again. It was early morning when I sat at my desk by the window, the same one where I used to write lesson plans decades ago. A gentle breeze drifted through the open curtains, carrying the scent of lavender from the garden below. My pen hovered above the page for a long time before I began to write slowly, deliberately, the way one writes a letter that truly matters. I was updating my will, but it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like closing a circle. For so long, my life had revolved around giving to my students, to my husband, to my children. I gave until there was nothing left of me, and when they decided I was too old to manage on my own, they believed they were closing my story. But what they didn't realize was that some stories aren't meant to end quietly. Some find new beginnings in the most unexpected places. As I signed my name at the bottom of the document, I smiled. 60% of everything I owned, the house proceeds, the investments, and the shares Adelaide had left me would go to fund Adelaide Living Community, in perpetuity. It wasn't just a nursing home anymore. It was a sanctuary, a promise kept. That money would ensure no elder would ever be abandoned, silenced, or forgotten again. The rest, 40%, would go to my children, but only on one condition. They had to continue their service here, not as heirs, but as caretakers of the legacy we built together. My lawyer looked up from the papers and adjusted his glasses. "Are you sure about this, Mrs. Hill?" he asked gently. I nodded. Completely. This time, love comes with conditions the right kind. He smiled knowingly, closed the folder, and left me alone with my thoughts. I sat there for a while, gazing out at the courtyard where Emily was teaching a group of residents how to paint small clay pots. Karen was arranging chairs for an afternoon performance, and Michael stood near the gate, greeting new families visiting for tours. Each of them was smiling, not the polite, distracted smiles they once gave me, but real ones, the kind that reached their eyes. I rose from the desk, my joints aching but my spirit light. The handmade rocking chair I'd commissioned sat waiting in the garden, a gift from the residents, crafted by one of our volunteer carpenters. It was carved from oak, steady and strong, much like the life I had rebuilt here. I lowered myself into it, the familiar creak of the wood greeting me like an old friend. The sunlight filtered softly through the trees, dappling the grass in golden patterns. I could hear laughter in the distance, the music of connection, of life. My heart felt full. I thought of Adelaide, of Rose, of all the faces that had passed through these halls and left their mark on my heart. I thought of the lonely nights when I believed I'd been forgotten, and how those very nights had prepared me for this peace, this purpose. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the warmth of the morning sun rest on my skin. They put me in a nursing home to forget me, I whispered softly, a gentle smile curving my lips. But here, I found purpose, and reminded them what family truly means. The chair rocked slowly, back and forth, as the sounds of birds mingled with laughter and the rustle of leaves. I watched my children from afar, working, laughing, living, and knew the story had found its ending, not in bitterness, but in grace. And as the sunlight broke through the trees, touching the garden in gold, I smiled one last time, not because everything was perfect, but because everything was right.